I just first of all, can I just congratulate the JCR? We threw the gauntlet out to them really and said, okay, you're saying scholars' suppers, yeah, not really so relevant. We said, you do them. Well done, exec. Congratulations. Lovely to see such a good turnout. So I'm really, really pleased. So I'm really pleased to welcome Kevin Dooley, who's come to us today to talk to us about addiction. Is it an illness or is it a crime? That's the title of Kevin's talk. And I'm sure Kevin will plug this himself, but he's just been doing some work with the BBC a couple of days ago, okay, and that's out on YouTube, and that's about homelessness. So it would be quite interesting to actually have a look for that when you're finished as well. If you like this talk, if it's doing something for you, then tweet while it's going on, okay? It's at Stevo College, I'm looking at Alex to nod there, at Stevo College, all one word. So whenever Kevin's ready to come on down.
It's great to be here in Durham. I've been here before and I've never seen much of your city because I was in the prison, Durham. Do you know there's a prison called Durham nearby? I was in there. So I'm an ex-prisoner, I'm an ex-alcoholic, ex-drug addict, junkie, homeless person. So you'll probably never had a lecturer with qualifications like that. But like, so apart from that, I've been off drugs and alcohol for about 13 years. Today as I stand in front of you, I don't need any permission anymore and I don't look for approval. I'm quite happy being who I am. But for years and years and years and years, I absolutely hated myself. Full of self-loathing. And I hated everybody else. And I couldn't go up and say to people, how you doing? My name's Kevin. Couldn't do that for years. Couldn't develop relationships with people. Suspicious of everything. Couldn't trust anybody, not even within my own family. And I come from a place in Glasgow called the Gorbals. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's the posh part. The posh part indeed. Well, like I come from a large family, 18 in my family. My man and dad had 18 children. They could fill this room, couldn't they? You know what I mean? 18 children. I'm the youngest when I was young. When I was born in Glasgow, I was born into a street. I had a twin brother. I was the youngest. My brother's 7 minutes older than me. But in the Gorbals in Glasgow, where I come from, you were familiar with social workers, you were familiar with the police, you were familiar with ambulances, with fire engines down your street. You were involved in gangs at a very early age. At 12-year-old, I was slashed in the face by an open razor in a fight. That's the area I was in. So I learned how to fight at an early age. I learned how to defend myself. I learned how to say, stop saying, Goni, stop. Here, just don't do that. I'm telling you, stop that, don't do that. To just throwing punches and just getting it our way. No questions asked. That was me from 12-year-old, becoming feral and running about an area and knowing how to progress through life. Because I seen people, there was guys going to church, there was guys joining the pipe band, you know, and they were involved in community centres, they were going boxing, they were going sporting, they were going to school, they were doing well. I was getting thrown out of school at 15-year-old after smashing up a classroom. Because inside myself there was total angst at all times. I was stressed, constantly stressed, depressed, couldn't understand who I was, couldn't understand anybody. I never knew a thing about addiction, I never knew a thing about alcoholism. I just knew from 12 years old, I hated being sober. I hated being who I was. And I found out when I read the book, you know, Keith Richards, the Rolling Stone guy, guitarist, he wrote a book and he says what he would go through, the contortions that he would put himself through, just know to be himself. And I went, that was me for years. And I couldn't walk up and say, go and help me, I feel confused, I'm frightened, I'm lonely. couldn't say that. Because in Glasgow, where I come from, nobody talks about their feelings. I come from a place, if you talk about your feelings, where I come from, if you talk about your feelings, they'd phone an ambulance, you know what I mean? They go like that. Oh, you better come big time, you just had a feeling, you know? Can you get an ambulance for him? Don't know what's going through his head. This is how disconnected it was. But like I said, for me, I never knew nothing at all about addiction. I just knew that I hated being who I was. I hated being this person. I was constantly awkward emotionally, constantly following me. Couldn't develop relationships, always jealous and insecure in every aspect of my life. And I put a front on. Became a good fighter, became a gang leader. And growing up, gravitated to drugs and alcohol and selling them. But when I first drank alcohol and drugs, I felt okay. The first time I took drugs and alcohol at an early age, my mates were vomiting. Oh, I'm never doing that again. I won't do that again. I'm going home to my mum. I can't be doing this. See, for me, when I took alcohol and drugs, the whole universe fell together. I went, this is brilliant being me. This is great. It gave me something that all the love in the world couldn't give me. All the reassurances couldn't give me. And love is an action. And my family were loving. There was a lot of actions to say that we really love you, Kevin. And I couldn't feel it. I was always suspicious. I could never receive love from anybody. Couldn't feel gratitude, couldn't feel appreciation. There was an emotional numbness in me. And I see you all sitting here today, and it blows me away. Because at your age, me, I couldn't do that. Don't know what the age range is in here. Who's 18 in here? 19, 20, 22, you know what I mean? We're bouncing about here, yeah? I had been stabbed and slashed and been in prison and imprisoned and suffered a brain injury and been attacked with baseball bats and a hatchet where 5 guys en masse tried to take me in a van. At your age, there was no progression, you know, and all that stuff. And what I had to do in my recovery was look at my own processes. How was it I was like that? Because when you take the drugs and the alcohol away from me, I never felt good. When I went into rehab and I got sober and clean, I never felt good. I felt the worst I've ever felt in my life. I felt terrified. I says that means I've got to talk to people. That means I've got to engage with people. That means I've got to have a relationship, and I've got to manage this massive thing called life, which I've never been taught about. And even in recovery, when I was in rehab for 3 weeks, I was seriously emotionally car crashed. I couldn't speak to anybody for 3 weeks. And that was 20 years of drugs and alcohol, not understanding nothing about myself or addiction. The reason I'm here today, and the reason I do what I'm doing, is because I'm passionate about what I'm doing, I'm dedicated to what I'm doing, I believe in what I'm doing, and it's because I didn't buy that if you just take the drugs and alcohol away, that person's going to be okay. Because for most people who are addicted, if you take that away, they become worse. And I had to understand that. How is it took me 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years to adjust myself emotionally and cognitively? And I couldn't get it. Comradeship. I couldn't understand it. I knew what you guys were offering me was really, really good, but I couldn't step forward and go into it because I was always suspicious and I felt unsafe and I didn't trust you. My world, as bad as it was, as dangerous as it was, I knew where I was there and I was going to stay there. There was nothing in your world, even here, college, training, employment, housing, family, love, sport, nothing. I'm not doing it. I'm staying here, where it's extremely dangerous. And for years in my recovery I had to go, what was happening there? And I educated myself. And I'd done a lot of voluntary work. And I went to college, started educating myself, psychology, social sciences, counselling, therapy. Underwent a lot of that, took part in voluntary work in rehabs, became a support worker, then went on to become an actual criminal justice worker, employed by the police. I went for an interview as a criminal drug intervention worker in the police, and they got me involved, you know. I went like, yeah, come on board. I told them my story, you know. I went, bang, this is who I am, and this is what I want to do. And they signed me up right away, bang. I became, 4 years I was a criminal justice worker. Now I've got my own consultancy. We're involved in the media. I develop programmes for people who are basically in recovery and reintegration back into society. That's what I do. I do a lot of these talks. I address the Cambridge Union. I'm invited to America by the federal probation. My criminal record, I don't know how they're going to get me in there, but I'm invited over there to their conference. I've addressed the international conference, the British Society of Criminology. I've been on BBC, News World Service, BBC Radio, Spanish radio, French radio. I've been on Chinese TV in America. I've been on Russia Today a couple of times. BBC News at 10 I was on, yeah, that was wild. You know what I mean? They sent a car to my house, the BBC, to pick me up and take me to the station, to put me on a train, to arrive in London for another car to pick me up and take me to Westminster to interview me on a government report on drugs. Then I went back, and when I jumped in the back of this big fancy car, going through the streets, do you know the streets I was going through? The West End of London, the same streets I was begging on. Going by shops, I was shoplifting in every day. In the back of a car, paid for the BBC. That's how much I've done in 12 years. From sleeping on the street, to go through a car, go through the exact same streets in a car, you know. It was one of them moments I went like, how did I get here? How have I been given the chance to readjust to my life, to give back? And, but for years and years, when I was all through as a criminal, I became a criminal and constant offender, entrenched in everything illegal, and I got 8.5 years in prison. Attempted murder, firearms offences, because I was in a gang who sold drugs. And I went to prison for 8.5 years, and I'd done most of that time, and not once did I get involved in anything that resembled rehabilitation, you know, in the British prison system. You know, nothing. It's very limited. Even now it's a lottery ticket if you get treated for your addiction when you go to prison. So I done 8.5 years, and what led in my life to get, for most of my life, I was on everything but roller skates. Everything but roller skates, you know what I mean? Pills, powders, alcohol, whatever. Until it got to the point where I ended up in prison. And do you know what happened when I went to prison? Do you think I went like that? What about my family? They're going to be really worried about me. Oh gosh, everyone will miss me. This is terrible. I'm going to miss everybody. Do you know what was going through my head when I get sentenced to 8.5 years in prison? How am I going to get out my head? How am I going to get stoned out my brain? How can I no be me in prison? And do you know what? I achieved it. A lot of drugs in prison. A lot of drug going about in prison. And I done it in there. And I done most of my time. And near the end, I got into art and writing. And I got a poetry award. And I got a short story published. And I got an art exhibition in Durham Cathedral. I was in Durham prison, and my artwork was in Durham Cathedral, and I've never seen it. I couldn't go and see it. But there was 7 pieces of my work was on show. I also painted a massive landscape for the new probation office in Durham. And that was me in prison at the end of my sentence. So those actions told me that I was trying so hard to kind of be somebody else, you know, to release myself. And what happened was, I had 3 months to go to come out of prison. In Durham prison up here, I had 3 months to come out of prison. And when I came out, my two brothers had just been up to visit me, and they came up again, and they told me that my son, Kevin, 16 years old, had died of a drug overdose. 16 years old. Methadone and Valium on the street. And I had 3 months to go. Done my time. Now what happened was, I was denied what was then called compassionate parole. With 3 months to go, they think they can give you an immediate release. But that wasn't the case. So what happened, they buried my son in handcuffs in a cathedral. He's coughing away down there, and me at the back. With 4 prison officers. And they're not allowed to touch his coffin. That's addiction. That's what addiction took away from me. That's what I was denied. I wasn't there for the most important person in my life. My daughter was 12 at the time. And my daughter would come to the visit in prison. And because of me not behaving myself in prison, I'd be on a closed visit. So there's a glass in front of you. So you can't even touch anybody. You can hardly hear a human voice. Sometimes in prison, I'd be in solitary confinement because I've been acting out. And I could go weeks in solitary confinement in a cell with no windows. I was released from prison with absolutely no interventions, no therapeutic interventions. I was left to go into the minefield of grief and prison release, a long-term prisoner being released back into society. There was no interventions whatsoever. So again, I hated the system, hated the whole system, hated the world, and I ended up homeless in London for 4 years. And I spent every penny I had injecting crack cocaine and heroin in my body, and I just wanted to get stoned every single day. And I ended up, my habit was up to £400 a day, £300, that's what I needed every day for the next 4 years. Last week I was filming in London. I filmed for the BBC, but we were filming for Russia Today last week, RT UK. I don't know if any of you know it, but the programme is called One Paycheck Away from Homelessness, and you can get that there. So my daughter, Shelley, came down the West End of London looking for me, and she was 15. A 15-year-old looking for her dad in the West End of London among homeless people. And it was that sort of action that helped me move into rehab. Yeah, my daughter Shelley. And I went to rehab for 6 months. And I went to rehab on the 13th, the 12th of February 2003. And I've never drank or used a drug since. I mean, and that might not impress anyone, but it impresses the arse off me. So, and what I've done in that time, in my recovery, is I've dedicated myself to helping addicts and people that suffer from myself. I was interviewed when I was homeless by the Independent newspaper. There was an article in the newspaper, and I said that I was on methadone at the time, and I was living in a hostel. And I said if I can get my act together and all the rest of it, I'd like to start something that could help other other users and homeless people and things like that. And all that stuff we were brought up with, where I stand right now, is I see a person who's addicted, a person who's using, who's substance dependent, and they stand in front of me, they sit in front of me, and do you know what I see? A traumatised brain. Somebody who's traumatised. And I don't think drug workers get that. There's this mechanical approach to addiction. They say it's substance dependent, you know, and all that stuff. It's, I think it's experience dependent. Because the origins of addiction are not discussed in the criminal justice system, in the drug and alcohol services in Britain. The origin, where addiction came from, nobody discusses it, nobody talks about it, nobody wants to talk about it. They know the mechanics, they know what a substance will do. But my argument is, it's not the substance that's causing the trouble. The trouble was already there. The substance is making it worse. The alcohol is making it worse, you know. So we've got drug workers who are sitting down in front of people who are addicted, treating them as normal people. When I was in the thick of my addiction, and even before that, I was far from a normal person, you know. But we've got drug workers who are trying to use the rationale of a mental capacity as myself, the exact same. You know, they'll understand what I'm saying. You know what I mean? You've got to turn up for your appointment at 3 o'clock next week. Are you going to be there? This guy's homeless. He's mixing snowballs, crack and heroin every day. He doesn't know where he's going to be. He doesn't even know he's going to be alive. And the drug workers are saying you've got to be here at 3 o'clock next week. And when they don't turn up or when they're late, they're getting pulled up. So like I said, the whole system, how we're treating that addiction at the moment, is based on criminal justice interventions. That's what it is. There's talk about addiction being a brain disease. Don't know if any of you've heard of that. But Dr. Krupp and Nora Volkov, both heads of drugs and alcohol in America, they're doing some brilliant neuroscience stuff, you know, neurobiology, and they're looking at the brain, and there's some great stuff happening there. And every time I look at it, I see myself. I see myself. You know what I mean? What if a person couldn't use the prefrontal cortex of their brain? What if it was dimmed down? What if the lights were down a little bit? The most important part of the brain for connection, for sense of belonging, for rationalising. Is this right? Is this right? Weighing things up. Complex ideas. This is what's happening in the front of the head. What if that was dumbed down? What if a person didn't have appropriate endorphins, serotonin, dopamine? What if they were damaged? They weren't working too well? Do you remember I told you when I was wee, I couldn't feel love? That connection wasn't making, I couldn't feel good about myself. There's a lot of chemicals going on in the brain, in places in the brain, that's making a person connect and have a sense of belonging and value themselves and value others. But if that brain has been stressed, prolonged stress or trauma at critical development in childhood, would that be the same brain? Would that change? Would that impact on the brain? And I think it does, because the research shows it does. And every time I look at an addict, I've got to understand they've not got the same resources as we have in here. They're operating from a different part of the brain, like I was for years. It's the primitive part of the brain. It's called fight or flight. So when I look at people who are addicts, I see a person who's operating from that part of the brain They're in a constant state of stress, a constant state of sense of danger. And when an addict steals from their own family, and steals from other people, and steals your purse, they do it operating from a place at the back of the brain, the primitive part of the brain. So there is no remorse, there's no guilt, there's no rationalisation. It's happening. It's getting done. Because they can't go through being sober, being clean. This is the obsession they get. Why is it so important for them to get out their nut all the time? Why are they willing to jump over counters in shops and grab money out of till? What, facing 10 years in prison? What would motivate a person to do that? Just to get high? My argument is addicts are not taking drugs and having injections to get high. They're seeking relief from a constant state of emotional distress and emotional dysregulation. They can't manage themselves emotionally because they don't have the resources in the brain. And there's other things as well. Apart from the brain being called, they call it a brain disease, a brain disorder. And when I look at that information from Dr. Kube and Volkov and Dr. Kevin McCauley, if you ever get to see him, he's brilliant. We really need to tune into him. And he makes videos and he'll explain very, very clearly what's going on in an addict brain. And neuroscience has took pictures of the brain, and you can see a normal person's brain and you see an addict's brain, and there's gaps missing. You know, even in memory, dysregulation in memory, you know. It's like, so why do they keep doing what they keep doing what they keep doing? It's because for me, drugs gave me something that human beings couldn't. In fact, when I took drugs, I felt human. I felt the same as you, and I felt the same as you. Now why was that? Because when I was young, when I was growing up, as I've described at the beginning, there's a guy called Bowlby. He talks about attachment. Yeah. Another guy called Donald Winnicott. And he talks about object relations and transactional analysis. What goes on between two people. And when your mother holds you up as a baby, there's something happening there. There's a relation between these two objects. And that baby's firing up endorphins and serotonin, and there's a healthy brain getting took. And I wrote down this tonight. T.S. Eliot, the poet, he says, "In my beginning is my end." It's where you come from, how you're grown. I never had any secure attachments when I was young. I was in a home for a wee while after my father died when I was 6 months. I went round different family members. I was in England, I was in Scotland. Lots of different places, 5, 6, 7-year-old. I wasn't settled. So the critical period for brain development, I never had any secure attachment. And another very important thing for to become confident and to be valued and value other human beings and trust other human beings and trust yourself is a thing called emotional attunement. And that happens when your constant caregiver or your significant other is there for you, so that you can step out the house and go to school and feel safe coming back to the secure base. And if your mum and dad's not back from the shops yet, or they might be out, you feel safe because of a thing called emotional attunement. You're attuned to the people that care for you. There's a connection there. I never had that. I went through life looking to listen to a song that all yous were listening to and I couldn't hear it. The angels had forgot about me. The hearts that you were carrying through your life, the adrenaline of life that was going through you, the joy of life that you could actually feel to the bone, that was absent in me. And when I look at people who are addicted, it's absent in them too. So we're not dealing with bad people. immoral people. We're dealing with people who are damaged underneath. They're using addiction, they're using drugs and alcohol and chemicals as a protective solution to unrecognisable trauma they can't understand. Somebody says the forgotten trauma is the most present. The forgotten trauma is the most present. And that's I know exactly what they're talking about. Because for years and years and years, I used to end up in a police cell and I'd say, not again, not again. What am I doing down there? And people who are in addiction, heavy in addiction, substance dependent, and they're in front of me, I can hear the scream inside them. Even if they're trying to keep it together. And I think my job today is to take the fear away from people. To let them know it's okay to come down here, where I am in my recovery. When I talk to new people, it's okay to come down here. You don't need to stay in that dark world. Then I worked with drug workers and I worked with the criminal justice system. And you know what I hear too much? They don't want anything, they've got everything. We gave them money, we gave them housing, we gave them training, we put them in a supported housing. You know, nobody's paying my rent. This was the attitude among workers. Bang, bang, bang. This was the attitude. And you've got to understand, if you've got a person who's addicted, who's in recovery and he's sitting there and he's got that circle round him, that social worker, that supported house, that support worker, a drug worker, a probation officer, he's got a employment training officer, he's got all this support wrapped round him. It's not the support that's round him, it's his perception of that support. This is what we need to look at. Because for a person who's addicted and he's coming into recovery, his perception of people, of relationships, of the world is one of it's unsafe and a dangerous place. It's very difficult for them to move forward and say, yeah, I'll do this and I'll come with you and we'll do this. They're hesitant all the time. They're anxious and they're stressed. They're addicts. There's a lot of people, I spoke to pharmacists. Don't know if there's any in here. You know? Any pharmacists in here? On you go, you're in front line stuff. You're good stuff. The pharmacists, because I was talking to him this week and there was this guy came in to pick up his substitute prescription in the chemist. It was in Somerset, a place called Bridgewater. And it was a chemist and I was in there. And I walked in this chemist, it was really funny, right? Because the manager came bouncing out, a woman, and she says, "You're Kevin Dooley, I seen you on telly." She knew who I was, right, when I walked in this chemist, right? And I'm going, who the hell would have watched me on telly, you know what I mean, except a pharmacist, you know? And she says, "I know who you are and all that," and she's chatted away to me, and I thought that was great. And a person who's on recovery, who's on Subutex, they came in the chemist, and the staff and the pharmacist said, "Hi there," they said him by his first name, they said, "It's a long time since I've seen you, we've all missed you, and we've all been worried about you." This is a person that society sees as a criminal, as a dangerous person, as a risk. And this is how the pharmacist welcomed them in front of me. You know what I mean? And that's what I try and pass on to people. To let people know it's creating an environment where it's safe for these people to be themselves, addicts, and people who are dependent on drugs and people who get substance misuse disorders, and understanding where if they're experiencing addiction, it's to create an environment where they'll feel safe. And sometimes all people need is a good listening to. You need a good listening to. That's what people need. And what I found then when I was working as a criminal justice worker, if you give someone quality attention, you give somebody quality attention, if you sit, shut that, and use these, why do you think you get 2 years in one mouth? Huh? shut our mouth and you listen to someone intently and you hear their story and you walk with them as they speak to you and you don't open your mouth and you let them unpack, open all the wee drawers, all the wee treasures inside and offer them to you. And they're probably, that's the first time in their life they've ever done that with someone. So the quality attention, the active listening, actually changes the prefrontal cortex. So you're building up building blocks for somebody to take away. And if it lights up the prefrontal cortex, you're lighting up problem solving capacity, decision making capacity, healthier decision making capacity. You're lightening up resources. Yeah? And that's important. And a lot of drug workers in treatment in Britain today, we're not looking at that, we're looking at the substance. And again, I'm arguing, it's not the substance, it's the person. And what I'm arguing is, the damage was done before the dangerous drug dealer came. What I was talking about, again, drug workers don't understand. Adverse childhood experiences. ACE. A-C-E. It's the research from the 80s on obesity and on to the 90s for addictions. And the last one was just recently. And they all came up, massive research on the population who were substance users, and they found that the bad health outcomes in their adult life had a direct link to those critical periods in childhood that I was talking about. That was my own experience I shared with you, but through research that I'm looking at, they found out that adverse childhood experiences, it doesn't have to be extreme abuse. Be a parent not being there, a significant other not being there, an alcoholic in the family, witnessing intergenerational violence, yeah, being involved in violence from an early age, abandonment, emotional neglect, all these things. And the more adverse childhood experience you have, there's a direct correlation with bad health outcomes in your adulthood. And that includes alcoholism and addiction. So we're talking about if you've got 4 adverse childhood experiences, you won't live as long as other people. You'll probably get involved in financial problems. You'll make more presentations at accident emergency at an early age. You'll make more presentations at police stations. You'll probably go to prison. You won't be handle financials very well. You won't be going to job interviews. So 4 and 5 adverse childhood experiences can impact on your life. 6 adverse childhood experiences can take 20 years off your life and give you 600% risk of becoming an intravenous using drug user. And that's what I became. I stuck needles in me. And when I look at this research, I see that there's a direct link between heroin users and how many adverse childhood experiences they have. So when I look at this research, anybody can talk to me about this, get in contact with me, email me, do what you want, check out my website, because I need information from you as well. So get me on Twitter, because I'm always bantering about with people. And I get loads of information from what you guys are doing, and it's really important that we do this, because we must move forward. Drug treatment in this country is not about punishing, it's about support. And drug workers in this country, they don't know what ACE is. Everything I spoke about tonight, drug workers don't get taught that. They don't get a neurobiological perspective on addiction. I'm arguing that must be de rigueur before you go near anyone who's an addict. I'm arguing that you must understand trauma-informed care before you go near an addict. You need to be living and working within either a rehab or a community intervention drug and alcohol agency that must be psychologically informed environments. Most drug workers today are just office workers. That's all they are. They're just in an office. They know everything about the mechanics of drugs. And I talk to criminal justice, and I talk to probation, and I say to them, we're creating this revolving door of offending, this revolving door of addiction, and I say to them, who's causing that? Let's just blame our addicts. Let's just blame the person who's stealing for his next hit and going to prison and coming out and stealing for his next hit. That's normal same behaviour. So that's what we need to do. Drug workers need to understand trauma-informed care. They need to work within psychologically informed environments. You know? They know about addiction. They just don't understand it. There's a big difference. And what I'm arguing for is, if we don't understand addiction, we won't understand recovery from it. Or those experiencing it. So too many times in this country have I seen people fall through the net. Like myself, fall through the net. And all it takes is a bit of knowledge, a bit of understanding, a bit of compassion. And someone once said, what does it take to treat addiction? It takes science, and it also takes compassion. You know, that's what it takes. I've been filming this week in London, yeah, and there was two guys on the street homeless, and they knew me from years ago, and both of them want to get into recovery. And why do they want to get into recovery? Because a lot of the time people see me, they've never seen anyone recover. They've never seen anybody achieve anything. So when they see what I'm doing, it inspires them to kind of want to make some changes. And what I dedicate my life for is to let people know that you're okay. You're okay. It's my job to make you okay, to help you be right, to help you move that little bit forward, to shine that little light in front of somebody. And how do we do that? By understanding addiction. By having a debate today in this country, in Britain. We want to talk about legislation and decriminalisation and cannabis and hash and all the other drugs. That is a big question, and a lot of the people that I'm involved with, they're pushing that forward and they're doing really, really good work. But what I'm saying is, what addiction has to be understood by the public before we can make these big questions. Before we can ask the public to have a debate about legislation on drugs or changing the war on drugs, which is basically a war on people. That's what it is. I mean, the war on drugs is a war on people and families of people who are addicted. That's what's happening. You know, otherwise, where addiction in this country today is being treated by measures which are punitive, yeah, which are punishing, and mostly it's criminal justice interventions, when we should have health interventions because it's an illness. It's not a crime. It's not morally corrupt person who becomes addicted. They're not bad people. They're very damaged people. Life makes brains, and brains make lives. And as T.S. Eliot, I wrote in my hand tonight, in my beginning is my end. You know? So everybody in here, you can go out there and you can rock and roll in all your professions, psychology, medicine, pharmacy, whatever you are doing. You can contribute into somebody's recovery. First of all, by understanding them, you know. The person in front of you who's addicted, they are in deep emotional distress. They don't have the resources or the capacity to emotionally regulate themselves. They're in a constant state of stress. That's why when they don't get their medication, they go up a height. Because the cortisol, the stress just swamps the brain quickly. They've got hair trigger response. Is it CRFC or something? Cortisol. All comes down. They don't have the dopamine to push that back, to manage that. You know? Do you know how your body's got a temperature? A certain temperature. And if you go above it, you're in trouble. And if you're below it, you're in trouble. It's the same distress system in an addict. It's like a temperature gauge has been moved to a different height, and they're trying to get to a place that's bad for them. But it's the only place they know. A lot of this stuff isn't understood. Like, so what I'm doing now, if anybody wants to see what I look like, you can go on my website or look on YouTube and things like that, and maybe you pop across the photographs of what I look like when I was in the madness. And that. But like so, I've been given a second chance in life, and I've dedicated this life to what I'm doing right now. I'm passionate about it. I believe what I'm doing, and I believe that it's not been said enough. You know, because if we don't understand addiction, we definitely won't understand recovery from it, or those experiencing it. Every single one of you is in here, no matter where you're at in your life. You've got the power to change people's lives. You've got the power to change yourself, change your attitude, change your beliefs, change your thinking. How do you care for yourself and others? You've got so much more inside to give. So when you wake up in the morning and look in the mirror, I want you all to say, I'm doing better than what I think I am. Huh? Because you are. And never doubt in your professional life, and when you move on, that what you do makes a difference. And you've got to believe that. Because it does. It does. They don't buy in to this this narrative at the moment we have about addiction being bad. It's only bad people that get addicted. Criminal justice is pushing that. It's punishing. Support, don't punish. That's what I'm arguing for. Support, don't punish, you know. I don't know, it's an absolute privilege being here. I was in, the last time I came here, Alistair invited me up once. I was doing Durham University, and I was in the Durham town, and it was the first time I'd been to Durham since I was in prison. First time I'd been here. And see, even though I'm years in recovery, I was really frightened about coming into the city, because when I got into the city, I felt like a junkie. I felt like small, and that's the shame kicking in, you know, which I had to deal with all my life. And I was in Durham when my son was told that my son died. And later on in my life, I was imprisoned in Brixton Prison. And I didn't tell you this, but like, so while I was imprisoned for 11 days without charge. So I was held in Brixton Prison illegally. During that time over Christmas, my mother passed away. And I said goodbye to my mother on a prison phone with the telly blaring and people arguing over the snooker table. Said goodbye to my mother. She died 3 days later, and I wasn't allowed to attend her funeral. And yet I was in a British prison being held illegally for 11 days. This is an article you can read about in the newspaper. They wrote about that. But I walked out of that court feeling like a junkie and went and had a hit and think nobody's ever going to help me. Who's going to do that? I'm only a junkie. I'm not worth anything, you know. So these things, experiences of losing my mother in that way in a prison and losing my son in a prison, so it was daunting coming to Durham prison, or Durham town, you know. So when I got here, the night before my talk, I went out a walk. and I could see the prison through the houses. And I said, I'm going to see this prison. I'm going to front it. I found the bottle within myself to go and face this prison. And I walked up and I seen these big gates outside Durham Prison. Yeah. And they were the exact same gates as I remember. And I walked towards them and I went like that, right up against them. And I walked up against them and I stood against them and breathed out like that and I touched them. And I was standing exactly where I was when I stepped over to freedom in 1997, in the same spot. And I felt empowered that I'd done that. I became whole again because I faced my fears. And I was ready for the talk the next day. But I wasn't ready because I felt a homeless junkie again. I felt a prisoner. But I was empowered, I was emboldened, and I marched away, and I walked away. And I spun round, and I looked up at the big doors in Durham Prison, and I said, fuck you. Yeah, and it was the most spiritual, soulful fuck you ever in my whole life. You know? And I could hear angels coming down, you know, and trumpets going, right? And I went like, fuck yes, do you know what I mean? There was that emboldenment. And today, I'm contented with who I am. I don't need your permission. I don't need anybody's approval. I do what I do. I'm writing books. I do speaking engagements. I do a lot of media engagements. I get involved in filmmaking. Doing all the stuff I love doing, you know. And if you guys are going to do it, and make sure you love it. Go for your passion in life. Because they say a lot of things in Japan, but like so they do say it like so, if you've got a job you love, you'll never do a day's work. You know what I mean? And another thing the Japanese saying is, if you want to plant a tree, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. And the second best time to plant a tree is now. So for me that applies, because I never planted a tree 20 years ago. I had to do it now. And we'll all be able, we can all do that, you know. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be among you, and a privilege to be among you. And thanks everybody for inviting me, and your principal for turning up as well. They told me it's a wee meeting. Yeah, it's been great here. I'll leave it there. Thanks.